Please welcome to the stage Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jonathan Capehart.
This isn't my first ComNet, but it always surprises me in a great way to see how many people are here. One of the things I was told in the first part of my book tour was to enjoy it, revel in it, so I've been taking pictures. Okay, I'm eating up the clock, sorry. Thank you very much, ComNet, for inviting me back here. It is wonderful to be back. More importantly, thank you for getting me out of Washington. So, where's the picture? Because this is baby Jonathan. I don't even know how old I was when this photo was taken. And there were things baby Jonathan didn't know when this photo was taken. He didn't know that his father left his mother, his wife of 2 years, before he was born. That his father died when he was 4 months old. But there were other things baby Jonathan would learn as he got older. When I was a little kid, the first 12 years of my life were spent between two different worlds. I was born and raised in New Jersey, but I spent pretty much every summer until I was 12 down south at my maternal grandparents' house in rural North Carolina. Yay, Tar Heels. Up north, I went to Catholic school. Down south, I was Jehovah's summer intern, going on the hunt for converts with my Jehovah's Witness grandma. Up north, I was beginning to live a life befitting the first generation of black kids born into de jure freedom in America. A black kid born exactly 3 years to the day after the enactment, of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and less than 2 years after passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Down south, I was in a Jim Crow relic of a town where my grandparents lived on a previously unpaved street with no name, but was known as Colored Street. It was there that my views on race began to take shape. And it was in the predominantly white New Jersey towns we later moved to, like Hazlet, New Jersey, that I learned how to navigate being black in white spaces, becoming an ambassador to the race, an interlocutor between blacks and whites. But matters of race are complicated. Hazlet was also where I began to learn how to be, as I mentioned before, black in white spaces. Blackness is always at the mercy of someone else's judgment. You can be too black, not black enough, or not black at all. And I have run the range my entire life. You can laugh, Some black people are eager to take away my black card. Some white people would rather I not mention my race at all. I was playing with my friends near the tennis courts at the other end of the apartment complex. I don't remember what we were talking about exactly, but we were laughing, telling little jokes. What I do remember is my contribution to the levity. Well, I'm going to carry my black ass down there, I said, employing a bit of phrasing common in black households, and utterly unfamiliar to my white friends. What does race have to do with this? One friend replied. Nothing specifically, and everything culturally. They had no idea what black meant in that sense. To them, I was invoking race where it didn't belong. To me, I was treating friends like family. In our families, black is used for comedic effect, or to put an exclamation mark on a warning. Mom, like all black parents and relatives, was adept at the latter. Don't you ever, as long as you're black, was a favored preface for one of Mom's admonitions against doing any number of offenses. Black ass is used in multiple ways, especially to grab one's attention. One of Mom's favorites was, "You better bring your black ass here right now." My use of black ass was clearly comedic, but in feeling comfortable with my white friends, I violated an unspoken agreement with an unspoken expectation. I was not black at all. The burden was mine to glide effortlessly between my black home and family to the whiter world, to switch from down-home vernacular to precise language devoid of anything ethnic. The tacit agreement required that I live on their terms. The rules of the unspoken agreement are designed for maximum white comfort with black presence, which means we must constantly prove to white people, especially those who don't know us, that we are following their rules. Hence, my mother's mantra, that is the mantra in every African American household. You have to work twice as hard to be considered just as good and just as qualified as them. If you are ever considered such, know that it comes grudgingly. And even then, the whiter world will remind you of where it believes your place to be. Through the relationships I built growing up, I thought I was building a bridge of understanding. And yet, way too late, I learned not every white person cared as much about my mission as I did. Way too late, I realized not every white person is as comfortable with me as I am with them. Let's face it, I was naive. But I have no regrets trying to live my values and live out my ideals. It was my naivete that gave me the blinders and boldness needed to plow obliviously through the nonsense to live the life I wanted to live. Those blinders helped with my childhood obsession, becoming a news commentator. There was a name for kids like me, the kids who couldn't stop talking and loved telling other people's business. We were called tattletales. And it kind of explains my love of news. I must have been out of school because I was staying at my Aunt Annie's and Uncle McKinley's apartment in the Bronx. McKinley was an electrician for NBC at 30 Rock. I recall McKinley telling us to turn on Channel 4, the NBC station in New York, to watch the Today Show because they were broadcasting from the plaza, and he would try to get in camera range to wave. Instead of looking for him, I became fascinated by the countless correspondents who told other people's business on television from all over the world. I was hooked. I wanted to be a television reporter, but there were no journalists in my family. No one in television, no one in television news, no writers of any kind. I had a destination, but no roadmap to get there. So I had my Carleton College interview at the New York Hilton. It's about 4 blocks or so north of 30 Rock. So I called my uncle, who was an electrician, as I said, at 30 Rock, and said, "Hey, I'm up the street. Can I come visit?" He was used to these phone calls from me. And he said, "Sure, come on down." I went, and by the time I got through security and up to the second floor, he said, "You're just in time. I have some work to do in the nightly news office. Do you want to go with me?" A rhetorical question, because he knew the answer was yes, and I was so excited because I thought for sure I was going to meet John Chancellor, Garrick Utley, Tom Brokaw, all my heroes who I'd seen on television. And I get there, and there's nobody there. Except this one woman. I was sitting on a sofa, and she was at a desk, eating a bagel, reading a tabloid, and drinking coffee. And I worked up the courage to talk to her. And I introduced myself, and she told me her name, Ann Skakel-Tarian, and that she worked at Nightly News. And then she asked me what any one of us would ask a kid sitting in front of them. "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I want to be Moscow correspondent for NBC, and then I'm trying to decide between London and the White House. But if I go to London, then I definitely want to go to the White House. And then after the White House, I want to come to New York and be anchor of the Today Show." I don't remember the look on her face. I can only imagine what it looked like, because I would have been like this. My uncle comes back and he says, it's time to go. And I thank her for her time and for answering my questions. And she says, wait a minute. And she opened a drawer, pulled out a notepad, and wrote down the name of Kay Bradley, who was the unit coordinator at the Today Show, wrote down her phone number, and with a flourish, ripped the page off and said, here, get yourself an internship on the Today Show. I did get into Carleton and made the most of my time there. I wrote for the campus newspaper, becoming its news editor at one point. Don't even talk about the lip. It's just, I was appalled when it was sent to me. I anchored several news shows on the college radio station while serving as its news director. And my 2 internships at the Today Show opened doors and worlds to me, including sitting on the set of NBC Nightly News during broadcasts. There I am in 1986, sitting behind Garrett Utley, who incidentally graduated from Carleton in 1961. Here I am on the balcony of the Labor Department on January 20th, 1989, working as a runner on the Today Show for the inauguration of President George H.W. Bush. So many dreams I had back then that got fulfilled. A detour into newspapers saw me earn a Pulitzer Prize at the New York Daily News and become an associate editor at the Washington Post. But nothing was more thrilling than getting a phone call 5 years ago this month informing me that I was getting my own national television show on MSNBC. What fun I've had in all of my jobs in journalism, the people I've talked to, the countless pinch-me moments throughout my career. Only in America could a little kid like me, with no destination and no roadmap, end up talking to the President of the United States in his conference room aboard Air Force One, twice. Only in America. So much has happened in our country since I started writing my book during Trump 1.0. So much that can drain you of hope, and I get it. But in his epic Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of Frederick Douglass, Yale history professor David Blight wrote a passage that was simple in its execution, but sweeping in its scope, and gave me the perspective I needed and still rely on to give me the hope that we will get through this. Here's what he wrote about Frederick Douglass. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret Black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the very victories and revolutions in race relations he had helped to win. What gave me hope in Blight's words was the sweep of Douglass's life. A man who was born a slave and escaped, who was a celebrated orator against the sin of slavery and saw the end of that evil institution. Douglass played a part in the nation reaching toward its founding ideals during Reconstruction. And then the great man lived long enough to see all the gains he fought for be reversed by Congress, the courts, and the president during the terror of the Jim Crow era. My story is proof that Douglass's fight was not lost. That as bad as things are, they won't stay that way. History is not linear. It's cyclical. I'm a descendant of slaves whose parents were born and raised in the segregated Jim Crow South. My cousins and I are the first generation in our family who didn't have to pick cotton. My story is the story of an only child mama's boy who had dreams of being a journalist and no roadmap for how to achieve them. I am a black man who anchors a show on MSNBC, serves as a political analyst on PBS NewsHour, and was an opinion writer at the Washington Post for 18 years. And I am an out gay man who was able to marry the man I love and have the ceremony officiated by the Attorney General of the United States, who made a key determination that made it possible. Just as an aside, this is my very favorite photo from our wedding that was taken by the New York Times photographer who came. And right then he said, "This gathering comes on the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration as president, and so therefore this is the first event of the resistance." Right on. A more perfect union we do not yet have. But notice how the framers crafted that phrase in the preamble of the Constitution. A more perfect union, in and of itself, is an aspiration, a destination that is never quite reached. For a perfect union can never be achieved as long as people are left out, are not allowed to fully participate. Through our individual acts and collective action, we the people make this a more perfect union. I firmly believe this because my story is a testament to it. Hard work and the gumption to push through doors I never dreamed existed put me on a path to meet people I never should have met in a life that I never should have been able to live. Statistics and popular myths say black boys like me don't reach these heights, and yet, here I am. Thank you very much for listening.
Please welcome to the stage Communications Network Board Chair, Anusha Alikhan.
I made it without crying. I thought for sure I was going to cry at the end.
It would have been okay if you cried.
I don't know, I ugly cry.
Hey all, this is such a beautiful crowd. I feel like I've been able to take a collective exhale with so many of you in the last 24 hours. ComNet is community. Jonathan, thank you for being here. Thank you for telling us your story, and thank you for being part of this community with us.
Thank you very much.
I read your book. It's fantastic.
Yeah. This is my copy with all the annotations. I didn't want to juggle.
Let's dive in. So, in your memoir, you describe the joy and the struggle of finding your identity and your community. Could you share how searching for and ultimately defining your own sense of community empowered you?
Well, one, I'm an only child. And so how many only children are in the audience? So you know what I'm talking about. You have no choice but to find your people. We don't have siblings. We might have cousins, but they don't live with us, or they might live down the street. They didn't for me, but I always wanted, because I was an only child, I wanted friends. But then because we then moved to predominantly white towns, I had to make an extra effort, simply because, one, I was the new kid, two, I didn't look like anybody else, and three, as I said, in my remarks, these were the early years after this, this civil rights movement of the 60s and early 70s. So I spent a lot of time trying to be accepted by my new friends, trying to be a friend, trying to have friends, and sometimes you do things that in hindsight you're like, wow, I should never have done that. But that's just the result of growing up and growing older. And quite honestly, I'm 58 now. It wasn't until I was in my 40s when I was like, I don't care. I would rather sit at home and watch Casino Royale again than to put myself in a situation where I'm with people who I just don't want to expend that amount of time with. And so building community is something that isn't static. We're always trying to find those people, find those groups of people who, in one way or another, feel like home. And that's something that I get at in the book that I didn't realize until I was writing the last few pages, that this notion of home keeps coming back in the book. And so for me, building a community is about building a home.
Absolutely. You talked about in your remarks today and in the book as well, how you had to assume different types of roles. And many of us in this audience right now, we're grappling with shifting roles as well. How might we build bridges and point out injustice, invite people in who we may not agree with, but at the same time not alienate others? Can you talk about a moment when your role as an ambassador, as you call it, an advocate, a journalist, came into conflict and how you navigated that tension with others?
Oh, we don't have enough time. I've thought a lot about this, especially after the first Trump election, because there was a lot of talk about the forgotten people and East Coast elites looking down their noses at people who aren't living in the urban centers on the coast and all that stuff. And part of it's like, okay, great, I get it. But when you lump me into that, you're completely erasing the entire story I just told you. Yeah, I'm at the Washington Post, but my grandparents live in rural North Carolina. You know nothing about my about my worldview. And as a journalist, when I'm talking to someone, I'm open. Because a conversation is a two-way activity. And one of the things that drove me crazy about a lot of the reporting during Trump 1.0, and even now, it's that, and I'm not going to lump you into this, I'll just put it on me, that I am supposed to take into account everything that bothers you, everything that you don't like, fill in the blank of all the things you don't like, and that's why you're rebelling against the system. But at no point does anyone put responsibility on that person to say, okay, you've had your say, now would you like to hear from me, my vantage point, my lived experience, what I think, because we might disagree on 55% of the things you just said, but what about the 45%? The 45% actually might be more important. But that's the frustration I have, is that the conversation is always one way. And if usually I am on that side of the conversation where I'm the bad guy, but I lose patience when I feel like I'm as open as I can be. I am listening to you, and I'm telling you, as you try to tell me that 2 + 2 = 5, that, from my lived experience and everything, 2 + 2 = 4. And then to have the person not think, well, does the person have a point? Do I agree? Should I agree? I don't know. So it's very difficult. I think when we talk about it at the big macro level, it seems impossible. But even since Trump 1.0, the number of conversations that are happening at the granular level, the local level, the community level, those conversations are happening. And more of them need to happen. And I would implore everyone in this room to, when you're in that situation, to just step back and try to understand where that person is coming from. But then at the same time, try, as politely as you can, to make sure that they understand that you do not share that view or that you come at things differently. And that doesn't make you or the other person evil or a monster. It's just we have two different lived experiences, and yet we probably want the same things: safety, great livelihood, a family that's safe and secure. I think everyone can agree on that, at a minimum.
Exactly. That's some of the themes that we've been talking about at ComNet as well. I think ultimately also it just takes a lot of resilience, and resilience is, again, this huge theme in your book. You talk about this moment of realization, and you actually use my favorite quote when you were up there, that the system has a long history of impeding the efforts of change makers. But in your words, despite your naivety, you plug ahead with blinders and boldness. What concrete practices and mindsets have helped you sustain resilience?
Resilience happens when you have a firm belief in something. Usually a firm belief in yourself, a firm belief in your family, a firm belief in your community. We all go through adversity. One thing I love to tell young people especially is don't be afraid to fail, because that's where the learning comes. And also keep in mind that you will never stop learning. Just because you've left college, guess what? You still don't know anything. You're about to learn. And here in the 5th decade, I'm here to tell you that you keep learning, and you keep bumping up against situations where you fail, or failure is visited upon you. And then what do you do to get back up? And it's important for when you are knocked down to get back up. If not just for your own dignity and self-esteem, but also for your family and your community, people who are looking to you for guidance. You are their pillar. You are their bedrock and the person they look to for strength. If you get knocked down and don't get back up, or you're not even seen as trying to get back up, that does damage. That does a lot of damage to the family, to the community. I mean, President Biden loved to talk about the fact that his father was doing great, they had a middle-class life, and then his father lost his job. And he always talked about how he watched his father look for work. That is something that drove that man for all of his public life, pushed him into public service. That's just one example that just popped into my mind. I was not being partisan, I swear.
But I also think that the fact that, the story you told about President Biden just now, your own story, that actually is what gives people hope and inspiration. And ultimately, we're in a crowd of storytellers right now. The storytelling you've done I'm sure has helped so many people, because we need to hear more stories like yours. What is your experience in journalism with the fact that often people of color, Black people, don't get to tell their stories in mainstream media? And what can you tell this room full of storytellers today about what they should be focused on in this moment, and really being able to shine a light on the folks that haven't had their stories told yet?
Holy smokes. Look, we have been talking about representation in newsrooms for decades now. There aren't nearly enough Black people, people of color, people from all sorts of backgrounds in newsrooms who are reporting on stories and doing it from their lived experience. I'm an opinion writer, so I get to sit behind the keyboard and do reporting, but then say exactly what I think about what's happening. But when you have news side reporters who come from a background that is not straight, white, Christian, cisgender male, you get a whole different flavor of the same story. You get nuances, you get cultural cues that you might not get otherwise. I mean, one of the things that drove Vice President Harris bananas during her presidential run was that the reporters covering her had no understanding of, one, who she was, but two, just her background. So, for instance, I did her the Truths We Hold book tour, the event in Washington, and I mentioned how she, is an AKA from Howard. Well, I mean, Carleton doesn't have Greek life, so what did I know? But when she mentioned AKA, I mentioned AKA, we start hearing the ski-wee going through the audience. The reporter from the Post said that it was screeching.
Oh, boy.
And it burned then Senator Harris up because it showed a lack of cultural understanding. A black reporter, particularly a black female reporter who might have been an AKA or a Delta but knew what that was, would have covered the story completely differently. But in the time that we're in now, the onslaught against diversity, equity, and inclusion, the retrenchment that's happening, we're going to look back on, I'm looking back on the days of the George Floyd protests and everything that was happening and the coverage that we had, the beautiful, nuanced coverage about what was happening in the country and to whom it was happening. A lot of those reporters might be gone from those institutions. And we, as an American public, are the poorer for it. I mean, journalism is the only profession that is protected in the Constitution because the founders understood that a democracy depends on two things: an informed citizenry and a free press to give the citizenry the information they need to help run the country, help put people in office of good moral character and standing and intelligence to help run the country. It has never been easy being a journalist of color. It is especially right now not easy. I do say, however, when I was that little kid talking to Ann Skakeltarian, the media world was completely different. There was ABC, NBC, CBS. There was no CNN yet. There was no MSNBC yet. There was no Fox yet. You had a strong local news, both in newspapers and television. You had New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. The avenues for getting into journalism were few, and the openings were fewer still. And you had lots of people working in regional areas hoping they would make their way to New York or to Washington. Today, with the internet and all of the opportunities for people to tell their stories, you don't need mainstream media anymore. If you've got one of these, you've got a movie studio, a television studio, a publishing house right here. Our Eric Thomas, a writer at Elle.com, he is the one who coined the phrase Auntie Maxine, because he took like a 20-second clip of Maxine Waters after a closed-door session with James Comey, and she read him for filth, and he diagrammed everything. Like, here's what she said, and here's what she meant. And it went viral. It was so great. So when I interviewed him, and he talked about how he got his start. He was simply writing things on Facebook for friends, just writing on Facebook. And then his friends thought they were so clever and funny and fun that they would forward them to their friends. And it just exploded like that to the point he got a phone call from Elle.com saying, hey, we would love to meet with you. He goes in, and they said, we'd like you to do that for us. And he's like, wait, and you're going to pay me? And they did. That never would have happened in 1986. But the media world is so open now. So if you have a story to tell it. On whatever platform you're on, tell it. You might not think, and it might not think anyone is listening or reading or watching. They are.
So in that same vein, as you said, media consumption habits have changed so dramatically. People can get information from everywhere, and traditional journalism itself also has been disrupted. But at the same time, as you say, there is tremendous opportunity in what comes next. We are, though, seeing lots of people retreat into echo chambers, and there's very polarized information in the current environment. Do you have any tips for how we can overcome that and really draw people in this moment? Again, people that may not believe the same things as we do.
Well, I mean, we've been in these echo chambers since the advent of the internet, since it was made widely available to everyone. This need to read viewpoints and see things that conform to our worldview, I think is just a natural human instinct. But in this time that we're in, so we're now 25 years into being in silos, it is imperative that we all become better news consumers. This is my harangue. I, as a journalist, do lots of things when I'm putting together a column. I do my reporting, both on the phone, talking to members of Congress, people in the administration, thought leaders, and everything. I'm scouring the internet for things to, either help my case or change my mind. And then, as I'm writing, I put a quote in, a number in, a dollar amount in. I will put in a hyperlink throughout because I have you, the news consumer, in my head saying, how do you know that? Well, who is that person that said that? Where did that dollar figure come from? Because my role as a journalist is to have you trust me, but trust what I'm writing is right, true at the moment, and fair. And I say at the moment because facts on the ground change. And then I go back and I do another column. But the problem is that you, news consumers, don't click those links. You sometimes just pop off at the headline or a quote. You know how many times I've had to yell at people on Twitter when Twitter was good about, how dare you say that? I didn't. It's a quote. Well, why didn't you say this? I did. If you click the link, it's literally right there. It's sentence number 2. You can't hope to break through these silos if you yourself don't do the work. Yeah, I used to say to people, if I wrote the way most people read, I'd be fired. And I think it's imperative, not just for news consumers, but for people who are in the business of narrative and storytelling, to model the acts that you want. So if you spend all your time watching Fox News, I implore you to spend maybe an hour each day watching what's on MSNBC, watching what's on CNN, because you're going to get a different vantage point, but at least you know what the news that other Americans are getting. If you're only reading the New York Times, are you reading your local paper? If you're only reading the Washington Post, are you reading other papers? Just pick a story and then pick a bunch of other newspapers or magazines and see how they're reporting it. When I was at the Daily News in New York, it drove me crazy because none of my friends read the Daily News. They all read the New York Times and Page 6 in the New York Post. But whenever there was big news, I would always read the New York Times first, because it would be the most formal and sanitized version of what was happening, particularly a scandal. Then I would read our story in the daily news, and it would be, a little less, you think of it like a hem, so the New York Times, the hem is here, the Daily News, the hem is here, so you get a little bit more color, a little bit more flavor that the Times thought was not appropriate to put in the paper. Then you go to the New York Post, which is like, it's a micro mini. And they are just all out. Like, here's the stuff, and this is what they said, and here's the picture. By the time there's a particular story that I'm thinking of, but by the time I read all three stories, I had a much clearer understanding of what was happening in this particular situation. And so, if we're going to break down the silos, we have to break down the silos. We have to model that behavior and tell people, please, for your own sanity and your own information, just go to another source to see what's being said and how it's being written about.
Absolutely, and I think sometimes also, and nonprofit communicators in particular have a tough time with this. I know I do in my own organization. We have to be okay that we're not going to reach everyone, even if we put our message out there. And in your book, you describe the power and responsibility of your own voice as a communicator, and again, that role that you took on as an ambassador to your race. But there were moments where you could not satisfy everyone. How do you come to terms with that?
Well, I'm going to take the first part of what you were talking about, y'all in the not-for-profit space and being comfortable not reaching everyone. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you have to always remember is that press release you put out, that the other things that you put out there that you think no one is paying attention to, you're leaving a record. Because one day, someone like me, a reporter or a college professor or a researcher or someone is going to be working on something, and they're going to come across what you've written. You are leaving a record for someone to find, if not in real time, some point down the road. So always remember that. When it comes to the resilience of being called all sorts of names, Uncle Tom, House Negro, what was one I was called an anti-sex gay man. I've been called a lot of things because I've written things that go against the groupthink. And so, I've been in this business for now 30-something years. And the first time, I got attacked and criticized, it hurt. But I'm trying to remember, I was writing a bunch of editorials about unsafe sex in movie theaters, gay movie theaters in New York. And I was catching hell from the gay community. This is all in New York in the mid-1990s. And I would go to LGBT events, and there'd be people who would, give me side eye or walk away. But then there were always people who would come up to me and say, "Hey, I love your work." And then they would move in a little closer and whisper, either, "I agree with what you're saying," or "Keep it up." And what that told me was, my job is to be their voice. You wouldn't know they were there because they're not vocal. My job as an opinion writer is to be the one who pokes his head up above the foxhole and takes all the incoming. But knowing full well, there are a ton of people behind me for whom I'm writing. I am their voice. Sometimes you have to be very strong in your conviction and very confident about your reporting. So when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, I remember going to bed that night. I was guest anchoring Steve Kornacki's show on MSNBC, and I was so moved by what I was seeing on Twitter that I wrote a whole show open I can't be a black man on television and not talk about this. I then wrote column after column after column because Michael Brown fit into what I'd been writing about since the killing of Trayvon Martin. Fast forward to the Justice Department's, Eric Holder's Justice Department's 2 reports on what happened. One was on policing in Ferguson. The other one was on the shooting of Michael Brown. And I'd done many television hits on Ferguson and the horror of financing the city's budget on the backs of black and poor people. And it occurred to me, we have not talked about the shooting report, so I read it. And my heart sank with every page, because reading all the evidence and then going back and looking, I realized that I helped fuel a false narrative. And that I, as a journalist, was thinking about the reader. How are they going to trust me if I know that what I've been writing has been wrong all this time? And so I went and corrected the record. And it was a through the looking glass moment, because African Americans were calling me a sellout and all sorts of names other than a child of God. And then I was in New York, and my husband called and he said, "Did you hear what Megyn Kelly said about you?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" "She's talking about you right now." And I ran back to the hotel room, turned on the TV. She's doing a whole segment on me and my column on Michael Brown, and how I'm a true journalist and one of the good ones. And we always knew what the people, the right wing that loved to send me all sorts of nice things, were suddenly I was their hero and their champion. I didn't care what anyone had to say. What was important to me was making sure that I went on record, corrected the record, and all those slings and arrows that I took for having done that didn't hurt, because I knew I was in the right. And I was, to this day, it is one of my proudest moments as a journalist. I know I've gone way over. There's a clock right here.
We need
for a guy in television. Whew.
I'm gonna take the heat from Sean on the time thing, because
Okay.
I still have a final question.
Sure.
Yeah, Here I Am, the book, the title of the book, ultimately is about beating all the odds, and you said this as well in the story you told us about Frederick Douglass in your remarks. So what are you hopeful for what comes next?
How could I not be hopeful? Seriously. I look at what's happening now, and it is horrendous. But I also know my history. I know the history of this country, and I know what we're going through right now is terrible and horrendous for us who are alive right now. And I can't see all the faces here, but I think there are a few people in this room who were alive during Jim Crow, who were alive during segregation, who were alive in the years after, who remember what it was like. There are people in this room who know that history. They might not have been alive then, but they know that the history, our history in this country, is not pretty. But it's also, as not pretty as it is, it's beautiful. And so that is the thing that I hang on to, that the framers, as flawed as they were, gave us a document that tells us who we should be and how we should go about it. And so, today I went walking before the altitude said, go back. I went to the Capitol, and I heard, the familiar sounds of a demonstration or a protest. And I went, and there you had Coloradans standing on the steps of the Capitol. I think a couple of them were members of the legislature, talking about how they need to stand with the immigrant community and to push back against what was happening. here in Denver. And there might have been maybe 75 or 100 people. But if you ask me what gives me hope, that gave me hope. Just stumbling upon American citizens exercising their right to free speech, showing their friends and their neighbors that they care about them and that they are willing to step out there, put themselves on the line for people they know, but people they don't know. And so this weekend, what is today, Thursday? So on Saturday is going to be the second round of No Kings marches. It is not a partisan affair. It's people who have decided, you know what, what's happening is not who I am, it's not what I want, it's not what we want, and we're going to take to the streets and show each other and the nation that we do care. And it is what I saw in Denver today, what I'm hopeful that we will see this weekend, is the American people saying that as bad as things are, they are willing to stand and push back against it to ensure that we get through this bumpy period. And we're going to need them because this bumpy period is going to get bumpier. But how many of you have ever been on a super turbulent flight? And guess what? You got through it. And we will get through this.
We will get through this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for telling us your story, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Jonathan, Anusha, I'm all the way in the back. I'd come up and give you a hug, but I did this by design because every time I stand next to Jonathan, I look like a schlub.
It's right there.
So thank you. I'm glad you took the extra time. And I will see you shortly, my friend. But for now, everybody else here, I get to play Pied Piper. I get to invite you after a long day, and maybe I should check in with you after this. How's everybody feeling? Energy's flagging, I can tell, I understand. I do not come with an offer of coffee, but I have an offer of libations and a good friends, and maybe a little opportunity to decompress and process a little bit. You want to join me at networking at night? If I can spit that out. Yeah? All right, get up. Get up. You're going to walk with me. Come on. We're going out these doors.